Hello, I'm Matthew Petrusek, Senior Director of the Word on Fire Institute. We're coming to you from our studios in Rochester, Minnesota. Welcome to 10 Questions. Today we have with us in studio Dr. Richard DeClue. Dr. DeClue is our professor of theology at the Word on Fire Institute, and he has agreed graciously to take 10 questions from us. Welcome, Dr. DeClue.
Thank you for having me here.
Now, we've prepped you on the rules, but here they are again. So I'm going to ask you 10 very direct questions, and your challenge is to answer either yes or no to the question. Now, you can say yes in this respect, no in this respect, but the goal is to avoid ambiguity at all costs.
Got it.
All right.
Do my best.
10 questions. Here we go. Question number 1. Can church doctrine develop? Yes or no?
Yes.
Oh, okay. How so?
So generally speaking, church doctrine can develop by a process of getting to greater and greater clarity. So you're not changing from one thing to another that contradicts it, but rather you're growing in your details of what you understand in different aspects of the same problem or question. So,
can you give us an example of within church history of how doctrine has developed, and it would be appropriate to say, yes, this is a development?
Yeah, I mean, I think a good example is just the Christological dogmas, right? So, like if you look at the First Council of Nicaea, it was combating against Arius, who had denied that the Word that became flesh was eternal. He taught that there was a time when he was not, that he was sort of the first highest created thing that then became enfleshed in Christ. But he also ended up denying that Jesus was fully human because he held that the Logos, the Word, took the place of the human soul. And Nicaea rejected that and proclaimed that he is homoousios of the Father, because Arius had said he is of like substance or like nature, but not the same nature as the Father. So that's where in the Nicene Creed we have, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, consubstantial, homoousios with the Father. So that was established at the Council of Nicaea. But then there were multiple other Christological councils, ecumenical councils that dealt with Christological issues. So like in Ephesus, the Council of Ephesus in 431, you had Nestorianism crop up, which basically said that Christ was really two persons in one. It was like you have the divine person and the human person. And so they had to specify, no, he's not only God from God, but he's also one person. So it clarified that further. So it's adding sort of another detail or aspect to the same question. And then only 20 years later in 451 in Chalcedon, you have another sort of clarification because the debates were still going on. And so that council had to emphasize the fact that it's one person in two complete natures, and the natures do not mix or mingle, but you also can't separate them because they're united in the one person. So an analogy I like to use is it's sort of like the evolution of television technology, right? You might have had a black and white TV set in the 1960s, and then it gets a little bit better. You get color televisions, and then you have, your 720p, and then your 1080p, and now you've got your 4K. So it's all the same picture, but with greater pixelation, you have more details, and you have a fuller picture.
This is a great analogy.
Yeah.
So let me ask this then. So this is sort of sub-question, parenthetical question. If we say that the answer to the question, can church doctrine develop, is yes, are there any limiting principles to that? So could I say, for example, well, this was the church's understanding of sexuality, say, 1,500 years ago. However, that understanding has developed, and now this is the new teaching.
Generally speaking, no. You cannot typically. Now, there are different levels of doctrine. And technically speaking, on the lowest level, there's a possibility of what's called a magisterial reversal. Whether that's ever actually happened is something people debate, but typically no. And especially on something that's already, if it's settled doctrine, where this has been perennially taught, no, you're
Like
not
the
going to have
teaching on
right. This
sexual.
teaching on sexuality, you could not change that because that's actually rooted in divine revelation and from what we know of natural law as well. So those things are unchangeable.
Got it. All right. So can church doctrine develop? Yes, but with qualifications.
Yeah.
All right. Great. Question number 2. Is being rigid in theological and moral matters always bad? Yes or no?
No.
All right. No.
Not.
Why?
Well, one thing that you see come up sometimes is that in presenting arguments, people just use arguments of adjective use. Like if you just apply the right adjective that has a negative connotation, somehow I've labeled this rigid, so it must be bad because rigid sounds bad.
Yeah.
But if you look at a synonym for rigid, firm. We're called to stand firm in the faith, right? So, you change the word, it has pretty much the same meaning, and yet one sounds good and one sounds bad. So it's not always bad because we're meant to stay firm in the faith, right? So you're not supposed to be flexible on things that are inflexible, right? You're supposed to maintain the faith in its entirety, in its integrity. And so if you want to call that rigid, well, then fine. But now what you can have is sometimes what people mean by being rigid means you're talking about their dispositions or their manner of interacting with other people to where they're very cold and coarse. I mean, even Jesus frequently, criticized the Pharisees, partly because of their version of rigidity, which was they were emphasizing certain things that weren't even of divine origin. They were of the Pharisaical tradition, not divinely revealed.
Right.
And they were emphasizing the very small, minute points, but then ignoring the bigger point of the law itself. And they were often like laying burdens on people's shoulders without offering to help them. And so if you have a rigidity that just simply says, this is the truth, this is the moral thing, but you're not going to help people that are struggling with that, then that would be a problem. So if you're being overly rigid in the sense that you're not even willing to help people with their difficulties and help them carry the burdens that they have, and to even have the patience to help them come to understand it better, and you're just like sort of coldly reiterating, talking points, then that could be a problem.
Got it. So being rigid in theological and moral matters is not always bad.
Correct.
All right. Question number 3. Can women be ordained into the priesthood and or the diaconate? Yes or no?
No.
All right.
So, no, that's settled doctrine. It has been taught infallibly by the Ordinary and Universal Magisterium and been reiterated by Pope St. John Paul II that the Church has no authority whatsoever to confer priestly ordination on women.
Right.
That's so the Church is infallibly taught that she cannot do that. And that's how it's phrased, that she has no authority to do that. Now with the diaconate, it might not quite be as clear in the sense that there hasn't been like a similar document like what Pope St. John Paul II did with the priestly ordination. But the same principle seems to apply, that Ordinary Universal Magisterium has always held this. This has been the perennial practice. And Pope Francis himself, really in 2 ways, has affirmed that teaching. Mm-hmm. For one, some people aren't aware of this, but he actually made a change to the Code of Canon Law. And what he did was, if a bishop tries to ordain a woman to any level of holy orders, whether it's diaconate or priesthood, what have you, both he and her are automatically excommunicated, or more officially, latae sententiae excommunication. In the very act of the commission, both of them are excommunicated. So he added that to the Code of Canon Law. And he also reaffirmed, I believe it came out in a book of interviews with him, where he said, no, that women cannot be ordained deacons in the contemporary sense of that term.
So women cannot be ordained into the priesthood and or diaconate. It's a settled matter.
Yes.
All right. So question number 4. Can a Catholic choose which church councils to accept or reject? Yes or no?
No.
Okay.
That would, I mean, if you could call into question the ecumenical councils and just pick and choose which ones you wanted, then it would sort of negate the whole purpose of the ecumenical council, which is precisely to, generally speaking, to settle disputes. So if you could just decide that, well, I like that council, I don't like that council, well, then you're losing the Catholic principle and the whole notion of the magisterial, the importance of the magisterium. So ecumenical councils are of the highest order when it comes to teaching. Now, even within an ecumenical council, some things can carry more weight than others. Not everything in an ecumenical council is an infallible declaration of some sort. But even when it's not, among the ordinary magisterial teachings, because an ecumenical council is an extraordinary exercise of the magisterium, even its quote-unquote ordinary or third-level teachings carry the highest weight alongside papal declarations of a similar sort.
Got it. So we cannot. The answer is no. Can we choose which church councils to accept or reject? Now, here's the follow-up question, question number 5. Does the Synod on Synodality, which recently took place, carry the same theological and moral weight as an ecumenical council, as a church council?
No.
No, it does not.
No, it does not. So this might be confusing for some people because the word synod can be used in different senses. Technically, an ecumenical council is a form of synod, but it's the highest form of synod. But there's differences. A couple of them would be the fact that an ecumenical council invites all of the world's bishops to come. Whether or not every single bishop attends, all of them are able to attend and to contribute to the conversation and to be involved in the process of coming to resolutions. The Synod on Synodality is only includes a representative body of bishops. So only some bishops participate, not all of them. Some of them are elected by their fellow bishops as representatives. Some are appointed directly by the Holy Father to attend. So you're already talking about a reduction in the number of bishops that participate, so it's not ecumenical. And then also a big difference is that an ecumenical council actually has magisterial and legislative authority. So it can, with the approval of the Holy Father, of course, actually issue doctrinal teachings and juridical acts that are binding. The Synod on Synodality cannot. And this is in canon law, that generally speaking, the Synod of Bishops is the Synod on Synodality is one of the meetings of what's called the Synod of Bishops. The Synod of Bishops in canon law is specified as being an advisory body. So basically, these bishops gather together to discuss questions and then offer advice to the Pope for him to discern which parts or not he will implement. So typically what happens is after a Synod of Bishops meeting, the Pope will issue what's called a post-synodal apostolic exhortation. But he gets to decide which advice he will take and which he will not. So it's merely an advisory body.
Categorical difference.
Very.
All right. So no to the answer, does the Synod of Synodality carry the same theological and moral weight? All right, question number 6. Are all religions equal according to Vatican II, or we could say according to church teaching more generally? Yes or no?
No. Right. So sometimes this is you'll see people say that Vatican II teaches religious indifferentism and that it points to this idea that all religions are really the same and they're pointing towards the same thing. But if you read the documents themselves, it's very clear that it's not doing that. Now, it does say some positive things about non-Christian and religions and the like. But that's just because it's true. So it talks about how, yes, in other religions, there are reflections of the rays of truth that enlighten every man. And that there are good things in other religions. Like some of them have some good moral standards, for instance. But that's just true. Like some people get upset that a council would say anything positive about any other religion. But in that case, the council is just trying to affirm what's good and true and saying we acknowledge this. It's not like everything in every other religion is bad or evil or immoral. So it's just acknowledging this fact. But it also after it does this, it very clearly states, but the church proclaims and ever must proclaim that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And refers to the Catholic faith as the fullness of truth and the fullness of the means of salvation. And it does not put other religions on par.
All right. So no, are all religions equal according to Vatican II or church teaching? Now this is related to this question, but it's embedded more at the individual level. So question number 7, does Vatican II's doctrine on religious liberty mean that it doesn't matter which religion any individual chooses? Yes or no?
No. So religious liberty has been one of these hot-button issues ever since that document was released, and I think it's highly misunderstood. So the documents of Vatican II very clearly state 2 things. One, that every person has the obligation to seek the truth and to hold on to it insofar as it is known. So, in order to be able to seek the truth and hold on to it, you have to have a relative freedom to seek the truth. You can't hold on to something before you've actually sought it and found it, right? So what it's saying is on an objective level, you must seek the truth, and that's what you must hold to. On a relative level, you have to have the freedom to do that. And so there's a sense in which, and all it's really talking about with religious liberty, it's not an absolute freedom of the individual to decide what the truth is, but to seek the truth and to be free from coercion by the secular state so that the civil government has no right to force you to believe one religion or to prevent you from holding to a religion. But that's a very, fenced-in liberty. It's not an absolute liberty. It's a relative liberty in relation to the state.
Got it. So religious liberty does not mean you can pick whichever religion you choose according to your own standards.
Right.
All right. Question number 8. Honing more in on on the question of individual freedom. Is one's conscience the ultimate authority on what is good and bad and right and wrong? The conscience, yes or no?
No. Now, this is a very nuanced question because, and I say no primarily because one's conscience does not actually determine or generate the truth about morality, right? So our conscience is meant to help us perceive the truth and then follow it. There's also the requirement to form one's conscience. And, for Catholics, that means learning from the magisterium and following magisterial teachings on moral issues, and therefore to submit oneself to that teaching and to try to learn from and conform to it. The appeal to conscience is often overused. Like, oh, well, I only have to follow it if I happen to agree or if I feel like it. Or, well, if I don't feel like that's right, then I don't have to. You don't use your conscience as a justification to ignore truth being taught. So the conscience, now it is true you have to follow, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, one can be required to even follow an erroneous conscience. But as Pope Benedict had pointed out in his own theological work, one could actually be guilty for a malformed conscience. If the reason your conscience is skewed and erroneous, you still might be guilty because it could be your fault because you either didn't form it or you willfully ignored the truth.
So oftentimes, if I'm understanding you correctly, conscience is misunderstood as kind of as a generative function in the individual. The conscience creates the nature of the good, and then I have to follow my conscience. But you're saying it's something that apprehends the nature of the good, and that's what generates the moral command.
Right.
Got it. All right. So one's conscience is not the ultimate authority on what is good and bad and right and wrong. All right. We're getting close to question number 10. Question number 9, can the church, in some instances, legitimately bless sin in order to pursue a greater good? Yes or no?
No.
No.
Oh, you want more on this?
Okay. Yeah.
So, yes, the church cannot bless sin, and this is something even the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith has said fairly recently. It cannot bless sin. Now, what it can do is offer people blessings to help them in their struggle against sin. You know, we're all sinners and fall short of the glory of God, and we all need God's assistance in overcoming our weaknesses and our failures. And so the church can obviously bless sinners. We do it all the time. But no, it can't explicitly bless the sin itself.
And what kind of pastoral advice can you offer to those who are, this is a question that's been circulating a lot lately, to hold that distinction between blessing sinners and blessing the sin itself?
I mean, my basic recommendation would be to just be clear about what you're doing. And you can do that sometimes through the formulation of the prayer itself, to just make clear what it is you're actually asking of God in the given situation.
Always seek clarity. Great. Okay. So can the church in some instances legitimately bless sin in order to advance a greater good? No. Categorically no. Question number 10. It's all been building to this, Dr. DeClue. Is soccer morally superior to American football?
Absolutely, yes.
Well, this is going to require the most explanation of all.
No, I mean, I just grew up playing soccer, and I really loved it. I used to have a T-shirt that actually had like a picture of an alien head, and the top part of the head was made of a soccer ball, and it said a higher form of intelligence. So, yeah, I mean, I love the beautiful game, as we call it.
All right. Well, I'm very glad we have settled that question. That may generate the most comments. So is soccer morally superior to American football? The whole package that comes with American football, you're saying
I'm not saying it's all bad. I actually was rooting.
All right. Well, we got some nuance there as well. Well, that is it. Dr. DeClue, thank you for joining us on 10 Questions, and thank you all as well for being here. We'll be back again soon with another guest to ask and answer 10 questions. God bless.